you. Louise can't be with us today, so I'm just doing the talk, but we're very much partners in crime when it comes to this work. So this is a bit different. This is about skill development. It's an idea that started off pre-pandemic. I think it's about 2018 that we first came up with the idea. And basically, at that time, our university was going through the periodic cycle of realigning where employability skills fit within the provision. Was it in-curricular, delivered in, as part of core modules, extra-curricular, students had to elect to go to it, or did they have some kind of a hybrid model? And we realised, like as many have said today, that role-playing games offer great potential for developing some of the skills that we are told that we want to foster in our students. So I won't bore you today with the background research on this, but just trust me that if you look at the 21st century graduate skills, the creative competency skill sets, or any of those periodic surveys where they look at big companies and ask them what skills they desire in graduates, you'll see things like the obligatory oral and written communication, but also things like creativity, imagination, teammanship, leadership, and those kind of things, which I'm sure you can automatically see the links to role-playing games. So we made a role-playing adventure that tries to develop some of these things in our students. So I'll show you the adventure. First up, this was designed for non-role players, but very much so. OK, so we did have some people who came along who had experience with role-playing games, but it's very much designed for people who had no idea what this was. So I'll talk you through what would happen. So the initial idea, we only had a small group of students and they'd come in and we'd ask them to create a character. Now, this exercise was slower than I'd like it to be, but to get people to warm up and to understand what they're doing. And I'm just showing you here an extract of the character sheet. I'll show you the full thing later on. And you can see already that it's adapted and we're using skills that align to those that employers want rather than the traditional D&D character sheet. So we talk them through rolling up their character sheet and creating a name and get them in the spirit of understanding what they're doing. Now, so once they've done the character sheets, we then sit round the table and we start the adventure and we create a story. I can't give it to you now. I can't do my full DM voice for you, but in essence, they're studying in the library, working really hard for the exam, and they all slumber and fall asleep on the desks. And when they wake up, they find themselves in a strange room with a cold white marble floor. It's dark, they can't see the ceiling. There's these strange concrete plinths around them, etc., etc. So we put them in a scenario. So they are playing themselves. They're not creating a fictional rogue or elf or dwarf. They are being themselves, but in a different environment. And we did this deliberately because these are non-role-playing long RPGers, and we thought it'd be easier just to be oneself than trying to create something fictional in this first iteration. So then the adventure begins. So it's exactly like a traditional RPG, as in that they are walking around and exploring the environment. So I guess it's more akin to escape room, what we've designed. In each room, there's a puzzle that has to be solved in order before they can exit the door. And we've designed the puzzles to test or be aligned slightly to different employability skills. So in the blueprint of the first room you can see here, so we decided to use a map. Certainly in the early iterations, we thought that'd help people have a physical presence. We did use some little meeples in order to allow people to drag things along. We thought that would help with the harsh idea of conceptualizing everything we're talking about. And this first one, there are 4 levers on plinths, and these four levers have to be pulled in a specific order in order to open the door. So it's really interesting, the first iterations, because it's often deathly silence as you start. I'm sure you played role-playing games before like this with new people, like I don't know what to do, but gradually they warm up, and by second and third rooms it really takes off. So we use a lot of subtle features in order to help move them on their way. So in the early room, I normally act as DM. I make more suggestions than I naturally would, make hints. Suddenly, if they're not doing anything, suddenly a loud groan or creak comes from one of the plinths. So I push them in the directions they need to be in order to do so. We were really worried when we first did this about the puzzles. So like this puzzle, like all our puzzles, has got different tiers. So they have to pull the levers in different orders in order to be successful. But if they're really struggling, taking ages, I change it in my head to they now just need to pull all the levers together. Yeah. And if I'm really struggling, they just need to pull the right lever. So I adapt the puzzle so that we can move on and they're not struggling around for ages. We're still really worried about, people not knowing what to do. So my colleague Louise plays a non-player character called Itch the Imp. And Itch the Imp appears spontaneously throughout the adventure, complete with a silly voice and whatnot, and basically offers clues and then disappears. So sometimes Itch the Imp is hardly needed at all, and sometimes Itch the Imps you use quite a lot. And this is a way just to push them in the right direction if they need to be. So they basically go through the room and play the puzzles. And as they do, we use we've got a big bag of those kind of gold coins and fictional gems you get. We start pushing them to people when we know that they're doing something that is an employability skill. So if they're starting to show some leadership, or be it come up with a creative solution to get out of the room, we push them a counter, and these are used later on. So they go through the adventure, and each of the rooms has got a different puzzle. And this one on the side of the warrior's tomb are a series of compass directions which they have to orientate themselves around the room to create a path through to create the correct tile. Then we've got one here with a statue which talks, and they have to negotiate with the statue to allow themselves to come out. One thing we did is we made sure that there was no combat in this, no violence. It's all about developing different skills. Another thing we're really conscious of is that in all these kind of environments, there's a risk that somebody will take over, someone will become a leader, someone will start dictating the conversation. And so this happened in our first adventure. So there's somebody who's just completely taking control, not in a negative way. They just had ideas about what should be doing. So I realized this wasn't going to work. So as they walked through the first door, I rolled a mysterious dice behind my DM screen, and this person happened to walk into a very sticky cobweb as they came through the door, and they couldn't speak for 6 minutes, whatever the dice roll was. And I used that kind of narrative hook all the way through. So basically it shuts up those people who are taking over and makes other people speak. Same with the statue. If there's someone who's very quiet, the statue will only speak to them first, etc., etc. So we kind of adapted it to make sure everybody became involved. So the adventure goes on like that. So we've got a series of rooms and corridors, each with a puzzle in it. We have a time limit for the game, and as you can imagine, sometimes we get through one room and 2 rooms and 1 corridor. Some we get through 4 rooms, etc., etc. So we adapted to how well the players were doing. So you're probably thinking, is this really linked to employability? So this is a blown up version of our character sheet with the skill schools you've seen already. And there below is just an extract to room 1, which is a simultaneous pulling of levers, and a very loose tick chart about saying what employability skills we would expect people to demonstrate in order to be able to solve that puzzle. So when the players get towards the end of the adventure, and this is just a kind of graphic of it, the kind of key hook here is that when they come to this final area, which looks like a patch of grass on the screen that you can see, that there's a wall there. We actually made a wall of smoke, and that through that wall of smoke they can actually see the library, where their sleeping bodies are slumbered over their books, and they want to get back through that, at which time Itch the Imp appears again and says that, unfortunately, in his squeaky voice, he can't let everyone out, and they've got to demonstrate their worth to him by showing their skills. And this is where the crowns and coins come in. So they can put those to align to their ones on their character sheet, and then they have to do effectively a justification to Itch the Imp why they're the ones who deserves to be released based on how they performed in the thing. And then he lets some through, all of them through, depending how mischievous he's feeling. He lets some of them through back into the reality, and the game's finished. So so that's the basic idea of the game. It's really good fun. It worked really well. So that was the first time that we ran the game, and just want to show you an extract of my sort of crib sheet about, how we set up the room, what skills are developed, and the kind of clues that were needed. It's very hard to kind of write a script for a DM, but I wanted somebody else to be able to do it. So the reason I've done that is because after running this with small groups of students, normally, 4 to 6, sometimes as high as 8, though it is very powerful, you're not going to get large numbers. So we started running with larger groups. So the largest group we did was about 60, I think. And when we did that, we basically we put them into groups. First of all, we asked if anyone's played a role-playing game before. If not, you ask someone who wished to be a leader. They get a briefing sheet and they basically act as DM with us floating around to help people. We've done that a few times, and all bar one group, it worked really well, having somebody take control of the leadership. And it's quite amazing the kind of different directions that people can take in basically an empty room with 4 levers in order to get out. It's quite impressive, though, probably speaking to the wrong audience with that regard. So we run that a few times as well. In COVID, obviously this stopped. But I was asked if I could do this online by a gaming group in Exeter, and I thought, anyway, I gave it a go. So this group, and there was about 35 people online. I thought, how on earth am I going to do this? So what I decided that they were all a big study group. And when they woke up, some of the players were in the room and the other players were effectively looking down on their friends trapped in this dungeon. They shouted them, they couldn't hear them, but what they could do is their mobile phone still worked, so they could text them. So those players who weren't in the room were using the text chat to tell people, what was going on in the rooms themselves. And then I flicked the players around. I should see all when you play. I flicked around the players between each room. And though it was a little messy the first time I did it, it actually worked okay. So you're probably thinking, this still sounds okay, but is it really employability skills? I mean, I'm very privileged. My research is all around game-based learning. And as always, the key is what you do pre and post game. And in this case, it's post game. So you don't want someone to go away and say, what did you do today? I had a great time. What was it about? Got no idea. You want them to say, I had a great time and learn things about employability skills. So that very short wraparound at the end, and in our case, it was only a few minutes and some anchoring into the career service and stuff that I've been talking about is a really important point of that. So we have written this up as an article. It's very low key. I mean, how do you write something like that? But we wanted to write it up. I'll share the link in a minute. But really, I feel there's real strength in more carefully exploring the development of skills using role-playing games and board games. There is a smattering of research out there. In most cases, the end tends to be very low, effectively isolated to an individual gaming group or incredibly generic. But I think there's some real potential there.